I remember getting really stubborn one time and being like, no, you're a single dude. I'm not undressing in this prayer closet for you to spank me. I stood my ground, but it was the norm. And so for me to rebel like that, I was scared to go home and get in more trouble for resisting the spanking. I really felt like an adult from about the age of like 11 or 12. Traditional schooling education stopped, and I was already at that point starting to be able to make dinner for 30, 40 people. You know, there's not a lot of fun and laughter and things like that as a kid. It's just, you know, there's chores, there's the gatherings. Are you repenting? Do you have sin on your conscience? Everything was an infraction. Asking if you could have more food, because the food that you're served at dinner is what's provided for you, that should be enough. So asking for seconds is gluttonous, or not finishing your plate wasn't being thankful. Being compliant is freedom. It's being able to, you know, maybe you can drive the car to the grocery store and you won't be tempted to look at the magazines in the magazine rack because you have the Holy Spirit. You know, we were really taught our joy was found in obedience to, they call him Yahshua. That's where our joy would come from, not from relaxing or, you know, reading a book or going on vacation, or, you know, our joy is really about serving. It was not odd to me that I was 16 and looking at getting married, kind of do my own thing and have my own bedroom, and maybe I could have like a teapot, and, you know, that much more freedom where you have like your little space carved out in this world with your husband.
Mine is the only voice.
What have I been doing?
Lay down my autonomy.
After that, it got very dark very quickly.
Hey guys, my name is Shalise Ansola, and this is Cults to Consciousness, where we discuss leaving high-demand religions or organizations and finding healing and independence through awareness and true individual sovereignty. And as always, if you're only listening on those podcast platforms and you would prefer to see our faces and support us the best way that you can, go on over to YouTube instead. It means so much to us when you can interact with the post. It boosts the algorithm incredibly. Anytime you interact, liking, sharing, commenting helps us. It also makes our guests feel seen, loved, appreciated, and supported. We have the best community. Thank you for your support. So today's guest, she reached out to us because she grew up in the 12 tribes. We've covered this once before with a mother-son combo. Both of those interviews were incredible. I highly recommend checking those out after this one. And today we are talking about what it was like growing up in the 12 tribes, getting married at 16, and being held hostage while she was pregnant, unable to see her husband because he was going through some disciplinary actions while trying to escape. So there's a lot to cover. Thank you so much for joining us, Rebecca.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. So excited to be here. It's been a long time coming.
Yeah, it's
sure.
great. You started your own podcast with your sister, who we are also going to have on. We're recording with her in a couple days. So we have lots of different perspectives. There's a huge age gap between you of 8 children total, right? 8 siblings total.
Yep.
So let's just give a brief history of how your parents got involved in the 12 tribes, and maybe one or two things about the religion itself so people have an idea of the whole community and how it works.
The 12 tribes started in the early 70s, and they've called themselves many different things over the years. But they really started as a kind of that idealistic communal living where people are helping each other and they're homeschooling and, you know, they're trying to eat healthy and worship in their own way and the way that they want to. And so that was kind of where, you know, it started back in Chattanooga, Tennessee, back in the early 70s. My parents moved to that area around the same time, mid 70s, I would say. They moved to that area from around like the Chicago area. So they were kind of like seeking a little bit, trying to find purpose. You know, they weren't sure what was up with Christianity and themselves and how they fit into that. And so when they ran into the community, is what they used to be called back in the day, it was just kind of like this, like, wow, this is perfect. Like, this is what we've been searching for. I think they were kind of at crossroads in even their relationship with each other. They had a third child on the way. You know, it was kind of a scary environment with, you know, the wars happening and things like that, and just kind of all the unrest that was going on. And so I think for them, it was just really just like there's like-minded people that, want to worship God, want to raise their children the right way, want to raise their children to be moral, have, moral compass and all of those things. And so my dad got really excited to begin with. He went into the Yellow Deli, the first one in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and was kind of like, what is this? What's going on? And through that, they got really excited, or he became very excited about the possibility of raising his children different than how he had been raised and how he had, gone through his adolescence and things like that. So it took some convincing from my mom. She was not about it to begin with. I think that he was just kind of like, I'm going, we're going, whether you want to or not. And so she did. They had my sister, who's 2 years older than me. So they had her right when they were joining. And then within, I don't know, I think she was just like a few months old, the whole group migrated from Tennessee to northern Vermont. So that was kind of for a couple of different reasons. They had come across some people in northern Vermont who were kind of trying to do the same thing. So it was like, well, let's kind of collect our resources and our minds and our thoughts and our hearts and kind of make this into a community. But they were also getting a lot of pushback in Chattanooga. So the churches were starting to give them a really hard time for kind of having their own services. Young people, like teenagers, before they were going into college, or even young college students, were very drawn to the idolism and, the peace and not war and all that kind of stuff that was going on in the 70s. And so parents were kind of starting to freak out. Like, people were joining and then cutting off their families and saying, I'm with God's people now. And so parents were hiring like cult experts to go like kidnap and deprogram their children who had joined. And so it was a lot of unrest towards feelings locally in Chattanooga, Tennessee, towards the community. So they left. They migrated north.
I think what's interesting about that, the fact that so many people early on already had their cult radar at high alert and wanting to change things. I think it's interesting that it was happening already at the beginning, because it was nowhere near what it would become, which is probably 10 times worse. And people were already like, oh my gosh, get my kid out of this thing. And so that also kind of tells you, it paints a picture of what the community was actually like, because it on paper, it probably feels like, oh, a homestead, communal living, everyone shares, no one is in need type of thing. But there were clearly so many red flags and signs that this was not a healthy environment to be in. And again, that was just at the beginning. So that is the communal side. Some of the things that stick out to me after interviewing Tamara and talking with you a little bit more is how when you move into this group, they take everything from you. You basically give up your entire collection of worldly possessions, and you move into a bedroom in a shared home, usually like a large home with lots of different families. So a family doesn't have a home with multiple bedrooms. Your entire family's in a bedroom, and then as you grow, you maybe get 2 bedrooms.
Maybe
if you're
get
lucky.
another one.
Yeah. And all of the work is shared, which makes sense, but you have really intense, grueling schedules of expectations, cooking meals for people from all hours of the day. And it really is more than a full-time job, not to mention all of the rules that they put around raising the children and how incredibly strict it is. And if you don't follow the rules, other people are allowed to discipline your children on your behalf. And so you really don't have a choice with that. And so I wanted to get into your perspective of growing up as a child with those really intense rules. I'm sure it was kind of all you knew. And so, you're completely isolated, so you don't really know any better. But hindsight is 2020. Looking back, what are some of the more extreme things that you faced as a child there?
So as a child, I, like I've mentioned before, I grew up in a very large family. It kind of depended on not who your parents were, but like how they buffered the discipline. So for me, it was very normal growing up. You got spanked every single day. I mean, that was just part of, they lived that part very out loud. They were not ashamed to say that they use corporal punishment. The whole goal of living communally and, disciplining and all this stuff is to purify yourself to be the bride of Christ. So it's kind of, they have Old Testament traditions and beliefs that kind of go into the New Testament. So it's a little confusing because it's not Judaism and it's not Christianity. It's all of the above. And so what they've kind of done is made kind of their own religion out of pulling different things from the Bible. So for example, spare the rod, spoil the child. If you beat him, he will not die. That is a Bible verse in Proverbs. So basically breaking his will into submission. So all of these rules and regulations were really, controlled, but being raised, we were told it was to become the bride of Christ and to purify ourselves. So we were ready when he returned, after it, like it talks about in the book of Revelation. So growing up, it was just you quickly learned the ropes. Like you quickly learned what to do to keep the peace and not to get into trouble. Everything was an infraction, speaking out or asking questions or asking why about, something, getting seconds without, asking if you could have more food because the food that you're served at dinner is what's provided for you. That should be enough. So asking for seconds is gluttonous, or not finishing your plate wasn't being thankful. And, kind of to your point with the spankings, obviously, that brought a lot of attention on us when we were younger. So we were really taught, and this is kind of, you have these moments throughout your life and your childhood, and I'm sure you can relate to this a little bit with your background. Even as a child, it's like, this is what I'm supposed to be doing, or this is the right thing, but you kind of have these little questions in the back of your mind. And I just remember that when I was younger, just like taking a laundry basket down to the wash that my mother had told me to do, and a single brother, we used to call him, asked me to go do something else. Like, oh, you can help put away the dishes, and I was like, no, I'm on my way to the laundry room. So I got hauled into the closet and got spanked by said single brother because I spoke out against him, but I was doing what my mom wanted me to do. So it was a very do as you're told, be seen and not heard. And then, it wasn't all oppression and all, heaviness. Like we had a good family life growing up, until I got married at the age of 16. So our parents did a really good job of trying to maintain, even though we were living communally, trying to maintain that family warmth and environment. So like if they had an anniversary day trip, they would take all of us with them and we would go do something together. And so I felt protected. You're really taught the world is such a horrible, horrible, big, bad place. And here you're protected. Here, even though I wasn't baptized yet, I had the Holy Spirit covering me by way of my parents.
Hey guys, I brought on Jonathan, our producer, and my husband to the front of the camera today to talk about our sponsor, Warby Parker.
Yes, I've actually been using glasses since I was 8 years old, and I personally use Warby Parker for a few reasons.
Why is that?
Well, a lot of other retailers don't have the vast selection that Warby Parker does. Also, you can go into a Warby Parker store to try on glasses, or you could try them on from home with their virtual try-on tool, which actually works amazingly well.
Yeah, that's what I did to pick mine.
The price is extremely reasonable, starting at $95 for a prescription, which means that you can buy multiple pairs, and you can add on features like the blue light block or the anti-fatigue, which in my case works extremely well since I'm always in front of the computer editing.
A C2C episode every single day, right? Yeah. Speaking of, I don't wear prescription glasses every day, but when I'm in front of screens for a long period of time, I do have a small prescription for that. So I picked up my own Warby Parker glasses. Jonathan hasn't seen them yet.
Not.
So these are the Baird frames with crystal and gold.
Okay, look at that. See your face. I can't even see the lenses on that.
I know.
Super
and
cute.
They have the anti-fatigue feature, which is extremely helpful when I'm sitting in front of my phone reading a guest book for hours at a time, or watching documentaries, or editing the occasional episode myself.
Yeah.
And why else do we love Warby Parker?
Yeah, well, for every pair that they sell, they actually give another pair to someone in need. which is very cool.
Yeah, amazing. At the end of the day, Warby Parker gives you quality and better looking prescription eyewear at a fraction of the going rate. Plus, for being one of our listeners, you get 15% off plus free shipping on 2 or more pairs of prescription glasses at warbyparker.com/cultfree. So that's 15% off 2 or more pairs at warbyparker.com/cultfree.
After you make your purchase, they're going to ask you where you heard about them. Make sure to support our show and tell them that C2C sent you.
Thanks so much, guys. Back to our guest.
And so it's like, yes, there's an outside world and there's things, but it's really scary. It's really bad. And what we're doing is the only true right thing and right way. So you don't really question. I can see how, like, for someone like Tamara coming in and she's like, whoa, like why is everybody able to instruct and spank my children? Maybe for my mother, it was like that a little bit. But for me, growing up, it was just how it was. I mean, if you had a male teacher and you disobeyed in class, you got spanked on the bare butt with a rod by male teacher.
Was that in front of the whole class?
No, it was usually, I think I got spanked in front of the class like once or twice, and it was probably like over my clothing. Or sometimes like a rod on the hand in the class, like if everybody's being disruptive, and the teacher would just kind of go around and, start handing out hand spankings. But even as like a 5 or 6 year old, even though it was the norm, I remember getting really stubborn one time and being like, no, you're a single dude. I'm not undressing in this prayer closet for you to spank me. I stood my ground. And it was like getting dark. All the other kids had gone home. And I'm like in the schoolhouse classroom, like, no, not happening. And so he's like, well, I need to go get an elder. And I was like, yes, because the elder I had seen in the building earlier was like someone I trusted. And he had a daughter that was close to my age and he was married. And I was like, okay, if anybody's going to see my bare butt, it's going to be the elder with the daughter and the wife, not the single brother. And he was a great, lovely elder man. And he came in and he was like, hey, I'm really sorry. I do have to spank you really quick, one lick. And I was glad to get it over with. But I just remember at that age being like, this is not okay but it was the norm. And so for me to rebel like that, I was scared to go home and get in more trouble for resisting the spanking. Luckily, I think my dad, I didn't get in trouble. He understood.
Something that people don't necessarily talk about frequently that I feel like it needs to be said, though, is spanking like that, especially on a bare bottom, that is CSA. I mean, I don't really know why we've gotten away from this idea that it's just discipline, or that it's not CSA, that it's just discipline, and that it's just a way to keep someone in line. You are asking a child to pull down their pants and their underwear completely exposed and be hit on the bottom when, I mean, I feel like most adults could think about the last time they were spanked and it's in a sexual context, right? Like if we're really being honest here, that is a sexual act in my mind. And it just blows me away that people don't make that connection and they think it's totally appropriate to do that to a child as an adult. I mean, it's wrong on so many levels, and it really bothers me and it makes my stomach turn, especially because they're children. And even especially the things that you're being spanked or assaulted for are so minor, it's not like you were going around with a knife trying to hurt somebody. It's something so small, and you are breaking the will of these children in such a way that they don't feel like they can be independent thinkers, or independent thinking is not even allowed in that group as far as I was. As far as I was aware. And can you just quickly explain the idea around no play for children and how you're just supposed to be completely controlled by your parents in every single facet?
So no play, that was something that gradually got stricter and stricter over my childhood, adolescence, etc. So growing up, we never, ever, in my memory, had TV, movies. As far as toys, when I was younger, we had like Legos, Lincoln Logs, and like building blocks. I think that was kind of the like as far as you can go with it. And then we did have sports. Like we would have soccer games after school or volleyball, certain sports. Toddlers could have, stacking rings and building blocks and chew toys and things like that. Chew toys sounds like a dog.
Teething rings.
Teething rings, yeah. So, but then as kind of things got stricter, it was really about our children don't need any time to what they call dissipate. So dissipating is anything that is not being productive and like doing something in a constructive manner. So dissipating, unless you can dissipate, no, it's not dissipating, but going for walks to like pray or like seek spiritual guidance, that's different. You can have your own time then. But anything that's not extremely productive. So even as a 2-year-old child, you were expected, if you're sitting in the high chair in the kitchen when your mom's cooking dinner, you're not playing with toys at the high chair. You have maybe a butter knife or even a spoon and are trying to cut vegetables so that you're learning how to be productive. So it's very serious and somber. And, there's not a lot of fun and laughter and things like that as a kid. It's just, there's chores, there's the gatherings. Are you repenting? Do you have sin on your conscience? A lot of introspective, I just remember growing up, and I told my dad this just the other day. We're having these conversations because they left a few years ago after many years being apart. And, it's just, it was so ingrained in you just to have, I always had a knot in the pit of my stomach growing up. Going to sleep at night, I was afraid to go to sleep. What if I don't wake up? What if there's sin on my conscience? Like it wasn't like an excitement or anticipation of like, the next field trip or, and there was a little bit of that. I don't want to make it all like that, but it became more and more and more like that when I was an adult and I was gone. So for example, I had my son when I was 19 and we left when he was 18 months. And even at that young age, I was getting, in trouble for like letting him play with kitchen measuring cups and spoons at the table instead of like helping me cut carrots. And he's 18 months old. So it just became more and more like that. Like less time to figure out who you were and what you liked and, what your interests were, and really all about like we're building the kingdom and we're being constructive and we don't dissipate and we don't play and we don't have anything outside of spiritual growth and focus. So yes, that was definitely a huge part of our lives.
Yeah.
And then like, for example, just as far as like outside, like I grew up in Burlington, Vermont, which is kind of it's a large town. And we lived in town. So some of the community locations are on a farm or kind of more compoundy, where we lived in houses in town. So it's like you're in the world, not of it. You see life going on all around you, but you have your very, very, strict centered life happening over here in the middle of all of that. So yeah, very, very different way to grow up.
Yeah. And of course, it's not going to be all bad, or no one would stick around for any of it, right? There has to be some level of enjoyment, or even if it's just the reward in heaven that you're seeking, and that's why you're doing all of these things, or that's why you're complying and suffering. And I guess I just want people to understand the level of mind control manipulation that has to go on here to keep someone so compliant in a situation like this, especially when it comes to someone else disciplining your own child, or you being forced to discipline in a way that you don't agree with or that doesn't feel right to you. And I think so much of that is keeping someone so busy to the point where they don't even have time to consider. Yes, they're completely exhausted and they just are trying to survive themselves. There's not even a moment where you can consider having doubts, because, and then if you do doubt, it must be Satan, it must be the adversary, because you are such in a fear-based mentality that in your head you think that you're all doing this voluntarily and that you want to do this and you're actively participating in getting to this kingdom of heaven or getting to this paradise on the other side, when in reality you are just so scared to do anything contrary to that, because the consequence, whether in this life or eternally, could be terrifying and horrible and monstrous. And so I guess I want people to understand how difficult it is to break free of that mindset, especially in a highly controlled environment where every action has to be approved. Every action, every moment of your day is scheduled. Everything that you do, what you wear, how you look is completely in line with the group, and you don't have the option of thinking otherwise.
Well, and compliance is freedom there. Like if you don't comply and you question, then you're cut off, which is their spiritual term for like being shunned or not excommunicated quite, because you can come back, but being compliant is freedom. It's being able to, maybe you can drive the car to the grocery store and you won't be tempted to look at the magazines in the magazine rack because you have the Holy Spirit. And that little pleasure of just being able to go to the grocery store and shop for the household, food for the week is a privilege. And the people who have those privileges are the most compliant, spiritual, obedient, so their joy, we were really taught our joy was found in obedience to God in his son, Jesus Christ, and they call him Yahshua. And so that's where our joy would come from, not from relaxing or, reading a book or going on vacation or, our joy is really about serving. And so if you were having a hard time with that or found yourself depressed or, not finding the joy, it was sin in your life. It wasn't.
Yeah.
There's an issue here. We're not taking care of our people.
Yeah, it's always your fault. It's never the group's fault.
Yeah.
For being too controlling and manipulative. It's always your fault and you're not doing enough. So you just need to do more and be more exhausted. So speaking of having all those feelings and you being one of 8 and probably taking care of a lot of your siblings, you're starting to get this idea of, if I just get married, things will be great. So let's talk about that idea of being so young and being on board with getting married at 16.
Just living the way that we lived. And I really felt like an adult from about the age of like 11 or 12. That's kind of where my traditional schooling education stopped. And I was already at that point starting to be able to make dinner for 30, 40 people pretty much by myself.
Hold on, your education stopped at 12?
Yes. My formal education.
What would that level be considered?
8th grade, probably.
8th grade. Okay. And in your head, you're like, great, that's all I need. And now I'm an adult. And
there wasn't. So my sister and I have very different stories because she was very driven. She wanted an education. She had a thirst for knowledge and like making something of herself and like being productive and successful, not so much monetarily, but just she had that drive of kind of entrepreneurism. I very much wanted to be a homemaker. Like that was my dream goal. I didn't want to leave. Like I never even considered leaving. And this is something that has come up in our podcast. She always, from the time she was little, knew it was or wanted it to be a possibility. Me, no, that was the scariest thing I could even think of. And when people would start to leave, when I was in my childhood years, people started leaving and it was such a big deal. It was like, why, how, you're chosen. How could you do this? So I digress. But really, marriage for me and having, you mentioned before you live communally. So I'd grown up in a room, living in a room with at least 4 or 5 siblings at a time. I've been, basically treated like a woman, had the responsibilities of a woman since the age of 12, 13. And so for me, it wasn't like I'm not ready. It was more of a spiritual thing. I wasn't baptized yet. And so that was kind of the driving catalyst. I didn't have the conviction that I needed to be saved or any of these things. And back then, you were baptized, not bar mitzvah and bat mitzvah, which they do now. And so there is more of a process now for that spiritual awakening. Whereas when I was growing up, it was when I felt ready, and I just never felt ready. And finally, one day we were at a baptism already, and they were like, "Does anybody else want to be baptized?" And I was like, "Sure." I'll go. And very quickly, so I was 15 when I was baptized. So very quickly after being baptized, my dad approached me and told me that another young man in another community in another country. So he was living in Australia with the founder and his wife in that community. They were kind of overseeing him because he was struggling. So he had tried to leave. He had been cut off. He was just struggling with his faith. So he got sent over to live with them because they were kind of like the last stop for some of these young people who were struggling with their faith. He went over there to live with them. He was rebaptized and kind of started to find his way again. And he expressed an interest in me as a partner, as a wife. And, he was like, I know she's only 15. That was the other thing that was kind of holding it up, is I wasn't baptized, so I could not get married. So all of this was kind of going on, but without my knowledge. Like, I didn't know that this person wanted to date me, and the only thing holding me up was baptism and all that kind of stuff. So pretty much as soon as I was baptized, my dad approached me and said, hey, founder's wife is going to be writing you a letter. This young man is interested in dating you. I think the reason, and they don't call it dating, they call it courting, because you date with intention to marry. You're matched, kind of like, yes, people show interest, but if there's someone that doesn't think it's a good idea, then that will never happen. Like, that will just get shut down. So I didn't know he was expressing this interest. Of course I was interested. He was popular. He was an elder's kid. And so I'm like, yeah, sure. We can start writing. So long story short, within a span of a few short months, I get a letter from her, the founder's wife, stating like, hey, so-and-so wants to write you and start to get to know you. Is that okay with you? We've spoken with your father, and he said yes. And so we started a correspondence courtship.
So real quick, I want to get in your head as a teenager, because from what I'm aware, kids were not even really allowed to speak to one another in passing. They were writing secret notes to stay in contact because they just weren't allowed to have friendships, let alone crushes. But what was that like for you as a teen? Do you feel like you had the desire to be with boys or hang out with boys or see boys or talk to them?
Yes, for sure. Obviously, just being a teenager, that's just a rite of passage, right? Like, you start like thinking about boys and talking about boys with your friends. So it was definitely discouraged, like, they call this the youth, for the youth to have conversations amongst themselves, even like girls. Like, I had friends who were girls, and so like that was called gossip. But I mean, you're kids. And so there's still a way to figure out who likes who, or, it's just your kids. It's just, nature takes over, I guess. So I was very aware of who he was and that I liked him, but it was also kind of unrealistic, because I was going down this one path of being a spiritual woman and he was falling away. Yeah.
Right.
So when they approached me with it, I was game. It was not odd to me that I was 16 and looking at getting married. I knew that in the worldly sense, like, yes, that is very young. But I was almost like, yay, like, I get to kind of do my own thing and have my own bedroom, and maybe I can have like a teapot and, have my own little tea station. I don't know. It was just, I know that sounds stupid for incentive, but it was that much more freedom, where you have like your little space carved out in this world with your husband.
It's totally relatable. I feel like if you are that controlled to the point of you're not even allowed to have conversations with kids your age, let alone the girls, I can imagine that being given the go ahead, the green light to actually talk to somebody and be romantic and have those feelings, just express those normal developmental feelings that teenagers have. I feel like that would be a lottery for a teenager.
Exactly.
Like, yes, I can finally express and I can just be myself and I can go into this without getting punished for something, without looking at somebody for too long. So it makes sense that you would feel ready for that, when in reality, you weren't ready for marriage at 16. Nobody is. I mean, I feel like I could say that with my whole chest. I don't feel like anybody is ready at 16 to be married. They're ready to experiment and to grow and to learn about themselves and their sexuality and their preferences.
I think that's
exactly
one of the things that to me is a huge travesty there is you don't know who you are. You don't know, like, there's individuality. We're created differently, but equally for a reason. You know, we're not all created exactly the same, and we don't all have the same personalities and drives and passions and things like that. And that's something that is taken away in these types of environments is the individuality and really being able to learn who you are. Like, I didn't know who I was at 16. I wasn't ready to be married. I wasn't, you know, and I know it's a sensitive topic even for my parents to this day because my dad definitely gave a lot of pushback. He didn't feel ready. He was nervous about the person himself, just being a good husband, leader, you know, of a family, and his spiritual path too. He was concerned about that, but that was kind of like, oh, well, she's perfect for him because he won't leave once he's in love with her and she's not going to let him leave. So we're good. You know, so
yeah.
But I didn't know all of that. I knew he had struggled with his spirituality and things like that, but I was also not privy to a lot of the things that he had gotten caught up in. And I feel like going into a marriage, like they knew that I didn't know that, like, I feel like that was shitty on their end as well. Just to keep things from me about who he was as a person and kind of his struggles
right.
and what I was going to be tasked with going into it. You know, I knew him from the charismatic and kind and loving and funny and all the things that he was to me at that time in my life. But throwing a 16-year-old into a marriage with a 20-year-old who has tendencies that aren't good, and I had no idea.
Yeah. And that's quite the age gap too.
Mm-hmm.
I think
that
that
age,
in itself
it's a
is
very
interesting.
large,
At that age,
yeah.
exactly. I mean, obviously when you're like 10 years older, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
But a 20-year-old versus a 15, 16-year-old is vastly different, especially just in your worldly experiences and what you've been able to see and do and accomplish at that age is basically nothing compared to a 20-year-old who's already lived abroad.
Yep.
So they were very intentionally using you as a pawn for the religion itself to keep him in the religion because they had every intention of trapping him as much as trapping you.
Right. So when you say it like that, it sounds crazy. But that's how, you know, that's kind of how it went down. I mean, yeah, it was set up, although we already liked each other, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, yeah, of course.
Yeah.
And I think there's two sides to that. Obviously, you weren't dragged kicking and screaming to the altar, but you also weren't fully informed and you were a child. So there's a lot.
Exactly.
There's two sides to all of it, of course. And it's not uncommon to see that those certain cults or high control groups using marriage to manipulate and keep the youth in and to keep the church building and growing. It's very common. It happens in Mormonism. And people wouldn't even think like, oh, no way. No, it doesn't happen like that. But it does. It's flirt to convert. If he's not a member, make him get baptized before you can get married because he can't take you to the celestial kingdom and you can't get married in the temple if he's not a member. So yes, there is manipulation and control there because they want to keep people in and they want to keep the religion growing. So we have to talk about the wedding because when you told me about it before, I was like, this is bananas. So walk us through what a wedding is like in the 12 tribes.
So literally the year that I got married, two other of my sisters got married too. So one got married in the spring, I got married in the fall, and my other sister got married in the winter. And this was in 1997. And before we got married, well, let me back up. We had one of the first betrothals. So before that, people would go what they called on a waiting period. And it was kind of a time for them to like date with intention, but still no physical closeness at all. Like holding hands, touching anything. And so that was kind of, the norm. And weddings were at that point a little bit, kind of romantic, but it was more about like Jesus coming back to get his bride. But it still wasn't a huge like play or production. The year that I got married, things changed drastically. So they started kind of what they call a pre-enactment. So, they were doing betrothals. We got betrothed. They put our hands together, literally in front of everybody, like clasped our hands together. So now we're like allowed to hang out and hold hands. And so they really started doing the pre-enactment that year. And by that, I mean going over the book of Revelation and Jesus coming back for his bride and like what that looks like to them. So it starts out like you're separated for the entire week before the wedding. You're not allowed to speak to each other on the phone, see each other. It's like it symbolizes right now, like Christ being away from his bride and like not having that closeness. But you could write letters. So we had like a little journal that we shared back and forth, and someone would deliver it back and forth. And I think we were about 30 minutes apart. He was in one community location, I was in another for the week leading up. And there's a lot of preparation and cleansing, and they don't have sex ed, so there's a little bit of my mom having conversations with me about that, knowing what I'm going into. And it's a lot of like preparation, spiritual preparation, things like that. Then on the day of the wedding, it's a whole like play thing. So the wedding ceremony, the vows and all of that, is at the very end of the day. The way that it begins is, well, they call it a throne. So it's like Jesus is the groom and they call him the king that day. He's king. And he's sitting on like a big, like, throne chair. Everybody's gathered there. And then somebody comes to tell him that his bride is ready. So someone that represents an angel, I guess, comes running in and like, King, your bride's ready. Everybody leaves that location and goes to a different location. So where we were married was on kind of a big piece of property, and there was different levels and locations. And so they all walked down this trail through the woods to this clearing where there was a platform, and it's decorated like the clouds and the sky and heaven. So it's like a banner, and I think it says there's an inscription on the back of it. And he gets up on this platform, he calls for his bride, and she comes running out of the woods, or the wilderness, I guess is what they talk about in the Bible in Revelation. And she goes up into the air, into the clouds to meet him. So runs up onto the platform. And then they exchange, they've rehearsed some things to say. So like she has a line, he has a line, she has a line. And then he's like, okay, let's go defeat our enemies. So before she can go back to heaven with him, they have to go down to earth and defeat all of his enemies that she's been on the earth with for all these years. So they go down to another part of the wedding venue, and they have a warrior's dance. So the groom puts on like a red robe cloak thing. It's like stained with the blood of his enemies. They get in this huge circle with like all the other commune people. And in the middle, they have or like people from the community dressed up in dark robes, and have things like rebellion and temptation and adultery and like all the sins written on them. Yeah. And so we're here to defeat those enemies. So we all like gather around, do this like warrior dance where like scare them till they fall over. Not kidding. And this is also your wedding day. Most of the times you're a virgin. So you're going to be having sex for the first time that night. There's 200 or 300 people there. A lot of probably who you're not that close with that have come from, different areas. There's a lot of guests there. It's kind of an outreach thing. So they invite a lot of like outsiders.
Hold on. They invite outsiders to watch this Bible LARPing. I'm just imagining what somebody on like thinking they're going to a wedding from the Yellow Deli, and they're like, what the hell is this?
Just YouTube 12 Tribes Wedding and you'll see a lot of it.
Yeah. Is this rehearsed? I mean, how do people? It's like a full-on production here.
It's not rehearsed so much. Yeah, there are practices for specific dances or performances, songs, things like that might be unique to that specific wedding. There'll be practices for that, but there's not like a whole rehearsal. It's just kind of like, okay, there's someone that's kind of, they have a master of ceremonies basically. So the MC is kind of like, okay, now we're going to this station to do this thing.
Was there any opportunity to do vows or any sort of romanticism or love?
At the very end, yes.
Okay.
So, and when you were shocked by them inviting outsiders, that is the point of this, is another outreach. They have like the buses at the concerts, and the tea and the medical tent. That's one outreach. Weddings are a different outreach. It's to show the outsiders like what's coming in the end days. So, yeah. So, and this next part you're going to love. So then they get to go into the kingdom of heaven. And this is where the groom crowns his bride. So before that, she just has a white veil on. Hilariously enough, I found the actual veil. It's like the only thing I have left. And I was wearing it around the house the other day. And my stepdaughter thought it was hilarious. But so they have the white veil, but they don't have any like flowers or anything on their head. Wreath or anything. So he crowns her. Everybody kind of gathers around and he crowns her with the wreath of flowers. This is when she takes it off. And again, my wedding was one of the very first that did this. So there was 2 or 3 prior to mine that I had been at to kind of understand what was happening. So she takes it off. She kneels down before him, puts it at his feet and says, "I'm not worthy to wear this crown. It's only because of you and your sacrifice for my sins that I'm worthy to like even be in your presence." And then someone sings a song, sometimes the bride like kneeling down, looking up, singing a song, or someone singing it and she's just like sitting there looking up at him the whole time. That was me. I didn't sing. And then he like pulls her back up to her feet, puts it back on her head and says, "You are worthy. I've made you worthy. It's because of, all the last, whatever you've been through in your life that's I've made you worthy." The whole premise of it is she is only worthy because of him, period.
Is that something that you internalized as a young kid where you're like, yeah, totally? Or was there something inside of you that felt off about that?
We just grew up with God is the head of man, man is the head of woman, like in his household. Like there was no question about it. It didn't feel weird. And even like when I was doing it in the wedding ceremony, to me, it was more of an act. Like in my mind, I wasn't like, you, new husband, has made me worthy. Like, no, for sure not, because I was much more spiritually sound than he was at that point. But it was that the whole like play part of it was weird. But when you're growing up in this environment and they're throwing all these new things at you constantly throughout the years and all these changes, what's one more thing? Like, okay, we're going to do this now. And so to answer your question, we did kind of after all that's done, the bride does a dance for the groom does a dance for the bride with other people, like bridesmaids and things. There's a couples dance. There's a lot of bowing, like not bowing, but like women kneeling to the men in the couples dance. I have a picture I'll send you. And then there's a big meal, kind of a feast. And then kind of the more like ceremony stuff where the parents speak and you get to share your vows. And maybe there's a song, like my husband sang a song to me that he had written. You have your vows, kiss for the first time. They make like a arm arch and you run through it. And usually the honeymoon cabin is like on the same property within eyesight of the celebration. Everybody runs over to the honeymoon cabin. The couple goes inside and then goes either out on a little balcony or looks out a window while everybody sings like a 15-minute song standing around. It's the same song every wedding. And it's really, really long. And the couple is just kind of sitting there like they've kissed one time. I'm sure they're like ready to make out or something. So that was also, our wedding was the first one that they did that at as well. So
Wait, hold on. You can't just leave it at that. So you just ran to a honeymoon cabin and everyone's singing. And then are you expected to consummate the marriage before you return for the celebration?
no. So
Okay.
after everybody sings, they go back and continue the celebration while you're expected to consummate your marriage.
So they do. So they don't wait there,
But they don't- you don't have to go
expect you to
back.
have sex.
You don't have to go back to it. I think they do that in Judaism.
Okay, so they just drop you off at the honeymoon cabin.
And you can have your honeymoon, and they're usually about 5 or 6 days long. Sometimes they're shorter.
How was this experience for you?
Strangely
As
enough,
much as you're comfortable sharing.
Yeah. Strangely enough, as natural and normal as it could possibly be. I think because we did really love each other and we were kind of like obsessed with each other, if you will. Our courtship was very charged.
Okay, good.
That's
good.
We were ready. And even though we weren't experienced or didn't really know what we were doing, it just kind of happened naturally and flowed naturally.
That's
the
good.
fact that there was 200 people having a celebration and dancing and singing till 1 a.m. outside of the cabin was a little strange, but you're kind of able to separate that and be like, okay, now it's our time to be alone. And that's
I
first
think
time.
that's great news.
Yeah, that's the first time you're like alone with this person have ever been.
Alone with anybody, right?
Yeah.
Because you're not even allowed to be alone with your peers.
Well, unless you're getting spanked in the prayer closet by a single brother.
Oh my gosh, unless you're being assaulted. So yeah, I think that's great news. And that's really all that we can hope for anybody who is kind of pushed into a marriage so young without any sex education, without any ability to discover yourself or figure out what your body does or what your anatomy is.
Yeah, you have to figure that out together, basically.
Yes. I think it's a great time now to talk about even the constraints and the restrictions within a marriage around intimacy, around the undergarments, around expectations, birth control, all of that.
It definitely was a little bit of a culture shock coming out of the honeymoon directly into married life, like married woman life. So taking my, that buffer of having my mom between me and the other women or elders' wives or whatever was a lot more dramatic than I was expecting.
We ended up recording for over 2 hours, so you guys know if you've been to the channel before, if you've stuck around for a while, I had to split this up into 2 different episodes. So sorry to leave you on a cliffhanger. It does get really intense. We go into all the ways her marriage was completely controlled, how when she was only 4 months pregnant, she ended up being separated from her husband and was forced to give birth on a ship. It's all pretty intense, and we're going to talk about how even though she was technically considered an adult and had a child of her own, how her life was still not hers, how she ended up escaping, and what the aftermath of that was. So thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure to leave those words of encouragement down below for our guest. It means so much to us and to them. It's the best way to support the show. It's free, and any way that you can interact with the post, just hitting that like is extremely helpful. Definitely subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss when part 2 drops. If you want to support further, we have channel memberships that you can join for YouTube specific perks. And if that's not your thing, you can go to Patreon at patreon.com/cults2consciousness. We have some merch at cults2consciousness.com, Eclipse channel. All of that will be in the description, as well as where you can find Rebecca and her sister's new podcast and any social media links they have given me. And if you like this video, I will link 2 more down here below. We talked to Tamara and her son Emmett, who were in the 12 tribes. Incredible interviews there too. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time, follow your highest excitement, be conscious, and be well.